Okay, our next speaker is Aaron Cope. Aaron is the head of internet typing at the SFO Museum, working on a variety of immediate and speculative digital projects. I love the speculative part. Previously, he was head of engineering at the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum, where he was part of the team that developed and launched the pen. He has been active on the web and maps for 20 years. For 20 years, working in both the public and private sector, including Flickr, Mapson, and Stamen Design. Aaron is, I'm going to try to get this right, Canadian by birth, American by descent, North American by experience, a Montrealais au fond. At heart. He usually just tells people he is from the internet. He's going to talk about the SFO Museum and the Wayfinding app. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I seem to find myself in this room every 12 to 18 months, so it's nice to be back. I'd like to start with a quote from Yoko Ogawa's The Memory Police, which wouldn't suffer from being required reading for all museum studies programs going forward. My memories don't feel as if they've been pulled up by the root. Even if they fade, something remains. So before the COVID-19 pandemic, the San Francisco International Airport, or SFO, handled over 58 million passengers a year. And if current trends continue, the airport is well on its way to matching and exceeding those numbers in the years to come. And in 1980, the airport started an arts program, which in 1999 became a fully accredited museum. And in the intervening 43 years, the museum has mounted over 1,500 exhibitions, stewards over 100 public artworks purchased by the San Francisco Arts Commission, and has built a permanent aviation collection of 150,000 objects. For these reasons, I'm fond of pointing out that the SFO Museum is, and I'm not joking, the world's busiest museum that no one knows about. So this screenshot was taken from the OpenStreetMap website a couple days ago, and it shows the 3C North Connector Gallery that was opened in 1981 and that was removed 3 years ago in 2020. So for most people, this one gallery is the museum. If it's not this gallery, it's another specific gallery in whatever terminal they happen to fly out most. And the museum publishes both printed and online maps depicting the scale and the breadth of our holdings. But still, the question that those of us at the museum are most often asked is, where is the museum? And we try to explain to people that the airport is the museum. But the reality is that the whole notion of a museum and an airport is still pretty foreign to most people. And so that kind of expansive answer usually just confuses people even more. So, did you know that in 2015, you could travel from one end of boarding area G to the other end of boarding area E post-security? Did you know that in 2023, so today, you can do that same trip, but go all the way to the end of boarding area C? Or did you know that next year, you'll be able to do the full loop of all the terminals post-security? Did you know that if your flight is leaving from boarding area G and it's delayed by an hour, you have time to walk and see a painting by Wayne Thiebaud, a mural by Paul Madonna, works from the Unknown Museum in Mill Valley, and a sculpture by Yo-Yo Kusama. There's actually a ton of other stuff, but that's just highlights. And you can make it back to your gate in time. It's okay if you didn't know. Most people don't. In fact, you could say almost no one does. So this is both the challenge and the opportunity for SFO Museum. And I say it's a challenge because at a very, very practical level, we are competing for people's time and attention. These are people who are racing to catch a flight, who are struggling with the luggage, who are trying to keep small children occupied, usually all of them at the same time, and they're surrounded by other people who are all suffering the same fate. Put bluntly, people are so busy dealing with the mechanics of travel that they don't even know that they didn't notice the museum, even though it's everywhere around them. But the opportunity for SFO Museum is that a non-trivial number of those 58 million passengers will come back to SFO at least once. And the opportunity rests in our ability to say to people, it's okay if you missed something the first time you were here, because it will still be here when you come back. So this is a talk about maps, because a map is the device that we've chosen to try and address the problems I've been describing. But it's really a talk about what that map makes possible and what that says about the state of museums in 2023. And I'm going to show you the work we've done, but I'm going to show it to you quickly, and I'll probably just skim the surface in order to come back and talk about some of those larger issues at the end of the talk. Okay, so the goal is to promote the discovery of the museum's programming in the terminals. And the first set of questions we need to ask are, where is a passenger? Where is the thing they're trying to get to? And how do they travel between those 2 points? So in a word, wayfinding or routing, which sounds straightforward in principle, or if you're a map professional, but not to anyone else. But it's straightforward only until you look at the burden and the overhead of running routing software, little of which was written or designed for a space as complex as an airport. And it's very easy to get overwhelmed by the scale of the problem. But as we were thinking about this, we said, what if we just didn't make the problem so complicated? What if we didn't need a wayfinding system precise enough to be used by automated systems? There's the self-driving car joke, if you want it. What if instead we married a very, very simple wayfinding system that was designed to have just enough detail to get a passenger to the general area in the terminals where a gallery or an object was located, and then let that same passenger with their giant brain figure out the rest? This is a very early sketch of what I imagined this might look like with a network of about 24 waypoints. And in reality, it looks like this. As of today, there are about 250 waypoints and another 150-ish museum-specific venues and spaces that you might be routed to, which, from my perspective, isn't too bad for something the size of the SFO terminal complex. Briefly, red dots are waypoints. So these are sort of arbitrary points in the network that we determine. So the beginning of boarding area A, the middle of boarding area B, and so on. The orange dots are gates that people fly in and out of. Green dots are galleries, and the yellow dots are public artworks. And it's hard to see in this image, but this network spans multiple levels at the airport. And all of that data is bundled into an Amazon Web Services Lambda function, and the actual wayfinding functionality is performed using a directed graph that's built in memory at runtime. And I appreciate that that's maybe more detail than you wanted, but I mention it because this service costs us pennies to run, and it doesn't require us to set up or manage or babysit a spatial database. And obviously, there's a tipping point in the size of any given network where a spatial database becomes necessary. But I think it's important to point out that in 2023, the distance before which many projects will reach that tipping point continues to grow. And that's a real opportunity. Here's what the current iteration of the wayfinding system looks like. Given any 2 waypoints, we can derive the route between them and show you any museum-related programming within 50 meters of that route. So for example, between the bar at the Grand Hyatt Hotel and gate B25, there are 16 steps and 38 galleries and public artworks along the way. We have, it means spots. Yeah. There's a lot of room for improvement in all of these, but it's basically the idea is, you know, get from the top of the escalator to the air train, take the air train to the next air train stop. After a bit of experimentation, we have settled on modal dialogues to display information. There's a real information density problem when you get into wayfinding. And modal dialogues have the advantage that they work best in mobile web browsers, and they mimic the sort of sheets metaphor that native apps use. This is a screenshot of the modal dialogue showing museum-related content. Fun fact, if you're at the museum and at the airport, and you have some time to kill, there are 4 Richard Diebenkorn prints on display in the lobby of the hotel. They're just sitting there. There we go. All of the galleries have shown at least one exhibition. And they have shown, you know, they've been there for 40 years. So we have a lot of work that no one knows about. So we've gone out of our way to promote that work and to try and highlight it. And going forward, one of the things we'll do, in addition to showing past exhibitions for a gallery, is to show past galleries. So for example, the gallery that everyone thinks is the museum in the United Terminal will show up in these maps. Sometimes people don't know where they are in the terminals beyond whatever is written on their boarding pass. So we've also made it possible to derive a route given a flight number. We happen to know both the gate and the terminal for a flight and its operating airline respectively. So we can create those wayfinding routes for people, even if they've never been to SFO and don't know their way around, which is pretty great. And a person can either enter their flight number manually, search for a flight by gate, or scan their boarding pass. Importantly, the boarding pass scanner, all of that work happens entirely on device. So we don't send any information to the museum or the airport or anyone else. I don't know how many people need to scan boarding passes, but we've made that work open source if you're interested. And one of the things to note is that in this screenshot, which is from the barcode in the last screenshot, this was a trip in April of 2023. And this is important because we not only want people to be able to scan their boarding pass while they're sitting at their gate, but we want them to be able to scan their boarding pass after their trip or months after their trip. And this is really important because we are operating in an environment where people are busy and distracted, and we're not going to reach them unless we design systems that can accommodate and adapt to their reality rather than our hopes and desires that they will, you know, have a meaningful moment with museum content while they're there, which, let's face it, probably isn't going to happen. One of the more recent additions is at the top of every wayfinding route, there's a create a custom publication for this route link. And what that does is it takes you to a form where you can create an on-demand bespoke PDF or EPUB book of that wayfinding route and all the museum-related stuff along the way. That's both stuff that's on display now, but again, you can also go back and select as many of the past exhibitions for the galleries along that route as you want. This is the screenshot of the title page for a PDF publication, complete with a map and the wayfinding route itself. We try to highlight things that are pre and post security. And these are formatted for a sort of standard US letter size page with the idea that they might be printed out for field trips that come to the airport or for passengers who know in advance that they'll have a very long layover at SFO. This is an example of what one of the object pages look like. We have, for any given exhibition, we take a number of studio quality images. And so what that presents is the opportunity to give people something that's nice enough that they'd want to print out and pin to their wall. This is a screenshot of the EPUB publication of the title. It's one of the table of contents. And so if PDF files are better suited to printing out hard copies, there's no question that EPUBs are better for mobile devices and kinds of devices that people will take on the plane with them. And so we would like nothing more than to produce an on-demand publication that measures hundreds of pages and spans decades worth of exhibitions for people to read at 35,000 feet. And in this screenshot, you can see an example of, let's see, at the top, that's Miniki Neko. There's the exhibition from the David Rumsey Map Center in the Boomerang Gallery in T2 in 2012. Clifford Stoll Math, which was last year, and this year's Recollections from the Unknown Museum. And this is just a screenshot of the title page for a given exhibition in an EPUB publication. So again, the map sort of contextualized, barcodes to get to stuff online, and then we provide all the content that we provide on the web for people. So an online digital wayfinding system is a useful tool to help situate passengers in the terminal. And this is a real challenge for us because SFO is big, people are busy, people are stressed out, and I think they often don't feel like they have license to wander around. And so this system and the publications that we can derive from it become a useful device to help develop and reinforce that spatial awareness about the totality of the terminal complex and everything it has to offer, notably the museum, right? So this is a very real effort to try and introduce people to the idea that, in fact, there are 26 galleries today at the airport, and there are these 100 public artworks, and they're there for you to see. And sooner or later, O'Hare is going to get snowed in, and and you should go see them. But one of the important threads that runs through all of this work, in fact, the sort of critical thread for me, is the idea that visiting the museum, and fundamentally the museum itself, extends beyond the building. And that simple idea that the museum extends beyond the building is largely antithetical to the way that most museums operate in 2023. Museums are desperate to get you in the door and to keep you there for as long as they possibly can, because while they will never admit to this, most of them have no expectation that you will ever come back. And similarly, an airport has some obvious economic incentives to get you to arrive early for your flight, but sooner or later, we know that you're going to leave. In fact, we expect you to leave. But as I said before, we also know that most of those passengers will return to SFO for the second half of their trip, or for an entirely new trip in the future. And the great advantage that a museum and an airport has is we enjoy repeat visitation by default. And it's really not considered good form in museum circles to say this out loud. But the reality is that in 2023, few museums, and I mean the vast majority of them, don't enjoy any kind of meaningful repeat visitation. Most people will only go to a given museum once, and those few people that do go to museums more than once will rarely visit the same exhibition twice. Now, before COVID-19, museums were able to kind of ignore this problem because the sheer volume of tourists pouring in for selfies and to check things off their bucket lists, made it possible to ignore this sort of fundamental question that repeat visitation, or the lack of it, poses. And I believe this is important because I think the act of revisiting is the bedrock of cultural heritage and the humanities. That act of revisiting is what distinguishes culture from entertainment. And there is a time for both things, and importantly, works which begin life as entertainment become culture all the time. But it is in the act of revisiting those works that entertainment becomes culture. And it is in the turning over and in the debating and in viewing a work over and over and over and again and again and again that something becomes more meaningful than simple escapism or the tingling of nerve endings. And I want to argue that contemporary museums have evolved to a place where they have made revisiting the exhibitions they put on and the collections they shepherd as difficult and as prohibitive as possible. This is an unpopular opinion among my peers. Just point that out. And this happens in a number of ways, but chief among them is the prohibitive cost of entry. Now, the economics of running a museum in the 21st century are a hot mess for a lot of complicated reasons. But it's important to remember that all visitors know is that it costs them upwards of $30 every time they want to walk through the door. And that's a pretty powerful disincentive for most people. And I take the position that is compounded further by the inability or the unwillingness of museums to meaningfully engage with a tool like the internet to provide any kind of post-visit or even pre-visit interactions. And I think all of this is important because if a museum's purpose is not to foster revisiting, then we need to ask ourselves how it is different from any other manufactured distraction available today. If museums, by their actions, actively work against the idea of revisiting as anything but a commercial transaction, then why should they enjoy a position of prestige relative to video games, for example, or any other media company? Really, given all the other options, why should anyone care about all this weird old stuff? And I want to be clear about something. I do not think that SFO Museum's wayfinding tool will solve this problem alone. The museum sector as a whole has painted itself into a pretty deep corner. And I'm not sure it's even accepted that reality yet, let alone thought about ways to address the problem. This is the burden of working in a museum in 2023. So I'll close by saying the SFO Museum wayfinding system is one attempt to build a practical solution to a specific problem. Where is something from the museum at the airport relative to a passenger, and how do we get them there? And to do so within the operational and financial constraints of a museum. And again, I want to emphasize the operational and financial constraints of, small to medium-sized organizations. But it is also an attempt to make manifest in theory and practice the idea that a museum and an airport can be a place of revisiting. That the value of the Wayne Thiebaud painting in Terminal 3, and it's really there, it's between two bathrooms, comes from being able to spend 10 minutes with that painting before your flight every time you come to the airport. When was the last time you were able to do that at a museum in downtown San Francisco? And that the museum will follow you out of the airport through the use of wayfinding tools and custom publications and other devices. I mean, these are just, honestly, we're kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall. but to do so as a way to acknowledge people's busy lives and as a way to encourage them to revisit something that they might have missed the last time they were at SFO. Thank you.
All right, very thought-provoking. So we're going to take just a couple questions. Go ahead.
Yeah, what is your navigation sensor for knowing where you're at? Are you using GPS?
So at the moment it's either manual input or we will use the browser's location geolocation sensor. But the idea is that we also have the ability to, given any point within the terminal complex, we can snap it to the closest waypoint. So that's one way that we would do it.
Hi, what other entities or museums use this wayfinding software, or is that something you guys invented for SFO? Thank you.
We built it ourselves. We haven't made this work open source of it yet. But that's only because it's still just sort of tied up in the minutia of our specifics. But as a general rule, we try to make as much open source as possible.
Hi, just two quick comments. One is I really appreciate the museum, which happens to be connected to an airport. 3 times a year, I'll go to the international terminal just to see what the new exhibits are. Right? And second, I'm pleased today to find out that samples of the exhibits are online, because I can see the exhibits where I don't have a ticket, an airplane ticket to go someplace.
Yeah.
Gray, hold on a second, Gray.
Mills Field was largely a WPA project, including the landfill in the bay. Is that a WPA model? I've never seen that before.
Oh, I should know that. I don't remember off the top of my head, but yeah, it is Mills Field. I mean, it's the old airport. So yeah, it would be a model of that. Yeah. I mean, it definitely is. You can see Bayshore, and then, oh, what I meant to mention is I can't go backwards. I can't figure out how to go backwards, but the photograph of these 3 buildings, those are a one-way now. Just fun fact.
All right, one more. Courtney, go ahead.
We are the only accredited museum. We are a capital M museum, but more and more airports have arts programs, and some of them are quite substantial. T2 in Mumbai hired a professional curator to come in and just like cover the place in art. And there's the Rijksmuseum has a small sort of branch outlet at Schiphol. You're seeing it's happening more.
All right, great. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.